Welcome to the Hiki-Goma podcast. This is my experience creating a manga from scratch, working with an artist, directing, and so on. And hopefully my experiences with that are valuable to you if you're interested in doing something like this in the future, or if you work on other creative projects. This episode's a little bit different to previous ones, not only in duration but topic. Basically, this is intended as a sort of end of 2022, start of 2023 sort of thing, but I've been sick the past couple of days and I'm still not feeling amazing, so this is going to be really truncated. Furthermore, in the past month, I've honestly had a great past month. December 2022, fantastic, very, very productive compared to previous years. It's kind of a highlight if months can have highlights. However, a lot of it is not exactly manga related explicitly. I think it's still valuable to talk about because it is part of the whole sausage effectively. But in essence, I guess to be concrete, effectively I did a lot of work altering my work environment. I did a lot of work on sort of meta elements that affect how I approach work. So obvious one would be something like I started waking up not much earlier, but I started waking up at 5 a.m. compared to 7 a.m. or so. I'd have a kind of rough wake up time. Now I'm waking up explicitly at 5 every morning. Why? Because I kind of am it's kind of racking my brain. How do I make, my process more efficient, making manga, doing whatever? I'm kind of getting distracted by certain things. The later in the day I work on this stuff, the more I get distracted. And it's like, okay, here's an obvious thing. There's only so much you can do within the actual, within the actual art form itself. And if you're not attending to certain things outside of that, like for instance, if I wake up at 5 a.m., if I wake up 2 hours earlier, no one's really awake at that time that I know. No one is awake to distract me. It's a kind of what you call a protected time. So I'm talking about sort of things like that. That has spawned from, if you've heard any previous episodes, I talk a lot about, I guess, relatively recently I've shifted more and more towards, a productivity mode you would call like a marginal gains model of finding these tiny little incremental increases in your productivity, your potential, whatever, the whole system you're using to do really anything, and stacking those things over time, those things that you would potentially consider kind of below you in a sense, that in actuality, again, you can see my head's kind of fuzzy from what possibly was COVID. I tested negative, but excuse me if I'm speaking in a kind of bizarre way. My brain is not functioning at maximum capacity at all. Nowhere near it. Basically, let me just cut to the chase. I have actually a show and tell sort of visual element here. I have this thing. This is a controller. It's called a TabMate. It's a controller for the program Clip Studio Paint, or Clip Studio Pro, I forget what it's called. Basically, it's a controller for a drawing program. It only works within this drawing program. Or so they told me, which is not actually true, and maybe I'll get into that later. This is a really great example visually or conceptually of the power of marginal gains in a way that it's often not possible to represent them very easily, but I feel like this is a really good symbol of this. As you can see, this has a bunch of, if you're listening to this basically looks like a kind of Wii nunchuck kind of thing. Basically a bunch of buttons. All the buttons are different. You press the buttons, they do things in the program. They run hotkeys, they change brushes, they zoom in and out, they, do a whole bunch of things, super programmable. The reason that this is really powerful and the reason I got this is because there are ways around this, but I'm like a left-hander when I draw, because I draw thumbnail sketches for the manga I'm creating. When I'm drawing those, frustratingly, normally this is great, but frustratingly in this case, all of the hotkeys are on the left-hand side of the keyboard. So if you're holding a pen, really annoying to touch the hotkeys and just having to look down at the keyboard. You can't really touch type if your hand's not always on the keyboard. It's weird. You're having to navigate the entire keyboard with one hand. You don't have the anchoring keys, F and J. So this seemed like a great solution because you're drawing one hand, you hold this thing in the other hand. Why is this a good example of marginal gains? Because, for instance, allowing myself to save 1 second by pressing this button instead of having to search for the eraser button, on my keyboard, instead of having to look for the button, maybe that saves 1 second. Now, actually, I think that that's significant. personally, but you're not going to really sell many people on, wow, I'm going to save 1 second every time I press this button. If you give them the stat, anyway, hard sell. But if you tell them, okay, sure, but if you program that for, 30 different things on this thing, possibly more, and you save at least a second on each of those, okay, now that's starting to be significant. What's even more significant, and it's something that really only comes with the experience of doing it, or at least this has been my experience, is you don't realize how much you're being distracted by these little dragging things. Not that I'm not trying to make an argument that they're actually causing some kind of deep psychic pain in your soul or something, but you really notice, for instance, where now that I'm not perfect at using this yet, I only just got this recently, but the muscle memory is starting to kick in where I'm, I know every button and I'm getting faster and faster at remembering where it is, almost like a touch typing thing. I'm really noticing how much time previously I was spending not looking at the canvas and how many times I was constantly looking down, right? That's just I've done this across many different domains now, even small things like, riding a bike to the store. I have a thing like, I have a helmet, has a kind of annoying strap, didn't get it replaced for ages. My tires are sort of slightly deflated. My keys, when I get home, they all look the same. I'd always get them stuck, in the, I couldn't find the right key. All these minor little drag things, and I just kind of went, this applies particularly to if you're me in this situation. Something I unfortunately will do with this kind of thing is, and I think actually this is probably a pretty universal thing, so I imagine that I'm not the only one who experiences this, where if you're under the impression that it's not a big deal. I'm fumbling for my keys. Who gives a fuck? I fumble with my keys. Okay, whatever. But then it's like, but how many of those things are happening in my life that I could alter, potentially? And so with that, I sort of just did an experiment where I went, okay, well, what if I just fix these things? What kind of difference will that make? And I really noticed it really had a significant change on mood. And that sounds funny, right? Because I didn't really notice, wow, it's so much easier writing. And I wasn't really thinking, wow. For instance, I colored my keys with a colored Sharpie, basically the interior of them. I should have brought them as a prop as well. But, just oh, I'm not fumbling with my keys. I'm not this. Everything's just a little bit nicer. And then I noticed that excess energy is just kind of has just been basically going towards the things I want it to be going towards, rather than just crap. It's waste. So I've been basically thinking about it almost in terms of the way that cars are made more aerodynamic, or planes or cyclists or whatever the fuck. Just reducing every little bit of drag that I can within reason. And I guess I'll make a sort of again, I haven't perfected this at all, of course, but so far I've been attempting to validate the testing with this. What do I mean by that? Basically, I'm not just sitting back and speculating, oh, what could be faster? Inherently with, basically trying to recording all of these minor problems and fixing them is that they're problems you should be experiencing probably regularly, right? Or there's at least a very good chance you're going to be using them regularly. For instance, it took me about a day or two to fully reprogram this thing. I actually ended up using it ends up having way more usability for me because I can use a different program that basically makes this usable on any application. So now I basically got a remote control for my computer. I can lounge back and read books. Whole usability I didn't even think of before. But long story short is that, I spend 2 days doing that, but I know, for instance, I'm going to be pressing these keys thousands and thousands and thousands of times, tens of thousands of times. It's not something that's going to go away. In fact, this is like an investment, effectively. This is what this is. It's an investment of time now, and you're saving potential hassle every single, every time you press this button versus the keyboard button, you're saving time, money, whatever, stress, slight amount of stress, technically. There's probably some kind of point that was building up towards, but I am very out of it. I apologize. it's a lot more significant than I actually expected it to be. I expected it to be pretty powerful, like, oh, okay, actually tracking all of these things, that's a good idea, actually getting around to solving some of these things that, you might otherwise put off. I think, that's a good idea, but I didn't expect it to stack as powerfully in the way it did. And the reason I'm kind of foaming at the mouth about this, I'm so happy about it, is that it's because it's taken a couple of months for it to really kind of get to a new kind of normal where I'm going, oh wow, I've actually really eliminated a lot of distractions from my workspace. There's the concept of a cookie jar, basically. If there's cookies in the kitchen in a cookie jar, you're way, way, way more likely to eat them because you're basically primed to eat them because they're there. Even someone who's not that into cookies, way more tempted to eat cookies. If they're not there, they're not in the house, and you don't ever have cookies coming into your house, the chance of, unless you're a super cookie addict, the chance of thinking about them, right, is going to be lessened compared to, that's for a variety of factors without going into that. But that's sort of, let's just say one aspect of what I did with my environment. Tried to remove all distractions, tried to optimize the setup, experimented with a ton of different methods, and it's not all working for a while. Maybe it's okay for a month. I don't know, is this better, is this worse? Oh, and now it's kind of paying off effectively, I guess is what I'm saying. This is something I guess I didn't do before. Why did I not do this before? A key thing for me, and I'm hoping other people experience this, even though it's a negative, is anything that isn't the work itself, I find really hard to get away from. I find it difficult to find emotionally or whatever practice time, effectively, critical practice time. In a way, the practice is easy. It's actually not sometimes mentally that difficult just to keep on doing the same thing over and over again, to go into this program, to make another page of this manga, or to go into an editing software and do more editing. But to take actually editing as an example, I edited, I probably edited for thousands of hours for sure. And I really, for a long time, did not look critically into what I was doing. And as a result, ironically, even though at the time I'm thinking, I'm doing tons of work, whoa, I don't want to waste my time like looking stuff up or solving this little problem. That's stupid. But obviously, if I just spent even a 3-day binge crash course watching every tutorial on YouTube or looking every single thing up that was causing a problem for me, old me would have been like, that guy is an idiot, I've just wasted a week. However, I would be buying myself back possibly literally sometimes weeks to months of editing in the long run. So even though, in a sense, I've got one part of my brain kind of going, you haven't really done as much of this stuff as you could have for, about a week and a half, 2 weeks that I've been really just dedicating myself to optimizing this stuff. At the same time, I know just from having done it so long how powerful a lot of this stuff is going to be just going forward, now that it's sort of, in a sense, some of it is solved. It's hard to explain. I guess this will be something I probably almost certainly continue to talk about in one form or another. If this is just to be clear, this is a kind of hodgepodge of a bunch of different ideas. It's definitely coming from probably the book Atomic Habits. It's coming from the whole concept of like a lean startup, of like agile development. It's coming from, I guess what you call growth mindset stuff. It's sort of a guy on YouTube called Justin Sung. He talks about meta-educational stuff and so on. I've actually mentioned him before. I was talking about interleaving, I think, in some of the earlier episodes of this podcast. And ironically, this is a kind of interleaving. Having this realization is coming from multiple different sort of synchronized sources, synchronized but technically unrelated sources. Anyway, I don't want to keep on gushing about marginal gains because this is more like don't want to be too preachy. But yeah, I found it, I guess, I don't know if profound would be an overstatement, to be honest. Pretty big impact on my life. Well, I'm kind of, you can just sort of start to see something being a really... something starting to become a big part of your life is kind of an interesting moment. I'm describing this like I'm in love with it or something. I'm gonna fuck marginal gains. I would if I could, but unfortunately it's only a concept. Anyway, thank you and goodbye.